It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here's WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is a woman that's so incredibly awe-inspiring. She's a hero of mine. She's amazing. I can't give her enough accolades. Welcome, Lieutenant Commander Bobbi Hovis.
Thank you, Donna. It's nice to be here with you. I've been here years and years ago, and it's fun to be back.
And it's great to have you here. So first, let's start off with a question we're never supposed to ask anyone. How old are you, Bobbi?
Well, I'm 91, and I'll be 92 on August 31st, and I'm very proud of it, and I don't mind telling anybody.
And you're an incredible 91. Jumping in and out of the car, you actually have Agent Orange disease.
Yes, I have Agent Orange disease. I acquired that in my Vietnam service. It's a horrible disease. It's slow and insidious in many cases, and other times it kills pretty quickly. But I've had mine since Vietnam, and I've survived so far.
Knock on wood. In 1947 in the United States, the Cold War had roughly started 2 years before. Harry Truman was in the White House. Jackie Robinson signed a contract with the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Secretary of State, George Marshall, outlined his Marshall Plan for American reconstruction and relief aid to Europe. And the second Red Scare and McCarthyism is in full swing. At that same time, you were commissioned in the Navy Nurse Corps. And that was right after graduating from Western Pennsylvania Hospital School. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So that's a little bit different for many of the women of that time frame. How did this all happen?
Well, since age 5, I had wanted to be a nurse. And when I became old enough to research hospitals that I wanted to attend their school of nursing, I found the Western Pennsylvania Hospital in Pittsburgh, and that's where I set my sights. And I worked for that all through school. I took all of the math and science courses that I could, and I had to have Latin. So I just prepared myself very early for a nurse career, and I wanted to go to West Penn, and I did, and graduated from there. And from there into the Navy.
And what made you decide to go Navy? Was the whole Red Scare thing, was that part of, do you think, going back?
No, it was Navy from day one. I grew up on Lake Edinburgh. I was so water-oriented. I had my own little 10-foot sailboat at 8 years old. My dad and I built small sailboats in our backyard. I was a lifeguard at the lake. I was just so water-oriented that I couldn't think of any other branch of service.
You also have a pilot's license, which is amazing to me. You started the pilot's license when you were in high school?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, my math teacher taught ground school. So I had engine repairs, all phases of flying except hands-on flying. And the reason was that we had no gasoline.
Because this was World War II, yeah.
So it wasn't until I got to Jacksonville that I soloed there and passed all my ground school tests, and I soloed in 4 hours and 20 minutes. And that was a bit of a record. And I went on from there to get my pilot's license, and then got orders down to Key West, Florida, and that's where I bought a Piper Cub. And I was a 23-year-old ensign. I did not have a car.
Got your pilot's license before you got your driver's license.
Yeah.
And got your plane before you got a car, which is amazing. And what year was that again? Around 1947?
48.
48, okay.
Uh-huh.
Piper J3 aircraft.
Yes.
That's amazing. You ended up going to Korea.
I did. I had always wanted to be a flight nurse. Well, since I knew of flight nurses after I got into the Navy. So I thought, oh, that's for me. So I put in my requests for flight nurse orders, and I got them. And went to flight school and graduated from flight school and volunteered for the squadron that flew the Korean airlift patients. And so I did. I flew the Korean patients that were evacuated from Korea. We flew back to Japan, where they were, we offloaded them all at Yokosuka Naval Hospital, which was a huge hospital. And
These are our service members that were injured in Korea flying back to the United States for further treatment. And or then go to San Diego, I assume?
Well, it depended, depending on their injury. Like amputees would go to Oakland Naval Hospital, and something else would go here. A psychiatric would go somewhere. This was an elaborate air evac setup that we had during the Korean War. There's never been a squadron like it before or after.
Were you accepted by men and women alike? Did you did women understand you? Because you're kind of different.
Yeah, I would say so. I had my friends, and what about our business? However, we didn't have much time for anything but flying and sleeping because that was a round-the-clock operation.
And you were accepted by all the servicemen as...
I never had a problem with a man as far as saying, well, you don't belong here, this is a man's organization, things like that. No, they were always very, very kind and good, and they were good people. I was before all of that.
I just try to think back to, obviously this is a little bit before my time, but I think back to the 40s and the 50s, and you think of women as secretaries. I know my mom worked for the War Department in the Navy in D.C., but, most of the women were housewives and didn't work probably. And here's this young woman who's a pilot, who's with the Navy Nurse Corps, who's flying missions from Korea to the United States. I mean, truly awe-inspiring. You're smiling.
I never think of that.
I know. And the weird thing is you kept asking me, what is this interview about? And I keep saying, this is about you. This is about your life. And you couldn't. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, more about Lieutenant Commander Bobbi Hovis. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. This is Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is a hero of mine. It's Lieutenant Commander Bobbi Hovis, who has done, everything. Starting in her teen years, getting pilot's license, heading into the Navy as a Navy nurse. And she was surprised that I called her for an interview, that I wanted to talk to her. She just blushed again. Why are you surprised by this? You don't view yourself as...
I don't view myself as a hero or anything. It's just something that I had my sights set on, and I wanted to train for, and I did.
You did.
And one step led to the other. First I had to be a Navy nurse, and secondly I had to go to flight school. I had to get that diploma, and then I had to join a squadron, and I joined my favorite squadron. I volunteered for it. That was the Korean Airlift Squadron. And then I flew other squadrons in the United States, North Africa. Our terminus in North Africa was Wheelus Air Force Base. In Tripoli, Libya, which Libya has been on the map a lot lately. And I flew all across North Africa, right along the coast, looked down on the Mediterranean, and
beautiful
to
area.
my right and see a huge dust storm, and down
the
below.
Sirocco's.
Sirocco's, you're right.
The Korean War wraps up, Vietnam starts. You decided you wanted to go to Vietnam.
Oh, definitely. And I was the first nurse to volunteer for Vietnam.
And you get over to Vietnam, into Saigon, there's no hospital, right?
No, it's what we call the American Dispensary, which was attached to the embassy. And it had one nurse staff, and about the best you could get there was a bed for overnight, and handed an aspirin.
You come over and you find what? An old...
we had to look around Saigon for a suitable building to convert into a hospital. Well, our commanding officer and chief nurse had been looking around before our arrival, and they found, they settled on an old French Vietnamese apartment building. And it was a fright. And our commanding officer took us over to see it. He said, "Girls, there were 5 of us. Girls, you have 96 hours to convert this into a naval hospital.
96 hours.
96 hours. Well, we wanted to run screaming out of that place, set our hair on fire, and go back to the airport and hop the nearest airplane for home, because you can't imagine people use the showers as toilets, and it was gross.
Rats, dogs, everything.
Everything. So, well, we were given a task, so after we settled down after 5 minutes, we said, okay, we can do this. So we nurses and our corpsmen, we did it. We got that up and running, and we were commissioned October 1st, 1963.
And 96 hours from taking an abandoned apartment building that was in horrific condition to a hospital that would be used for the troops throughout the war. Let's come back and talk more about this. This is Donna Cole on the 1430 Connection. We will be right back. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. This is Donna Cole. In the studio with me today is the very awe-inspiring, yet she would never admit to this, heroic Lieutenant Commander Bobbi Hovis of Annapolis. She was the first Navy nurse to volunteer for Vietnam. She had a pilot's license from her teens. She went to Korea. She flew missions over North Africa. She's done a lot. And by the way, she still gets up in aircrafts even today. She flies in a biplane every year, she was telling me, in Ocean City, which I find, well, pretty cool. We were just talking about setting up that very first hospital in Saigon as the war was starting to build, and how much a hospital was critical at that point in time. And by the way, you've written a book that's still out there on Amazon. The name of the book is?
Station Hospital Saigon, a Navy nurse in Vietnam.
So if you want to learn more about Commander Hovis, do find that book. On a post written by Tom Cutler on the Naval History blog, I'm reading, Bobbi's world descended into chaos. Coils of barbed wire blocked the streets, and gun emplacements commanded urban fields of fire just outside the hospital. As Commander Hovis watched from the 5th floor, 3 aircraft dove on the presidential palace a few blocks away. Bullets flew in all directions, and Bobbi watched helplessly as one entered the rear window of a car, passed through the driver, and blew out the windshield in front. She saw National Police madly tearing off their uniforms, throwing them down, and disappearing into the chaotic maze of Saigon streets. Saigon wasn't a beautiful place to be. There was also a bombing of the BOQ, was there not?
Oh, yes, and also of the embassy. Many Viet Cong. Much as today, it was terrorist activity. That's what it was. Exactly, like today.
Were you in the BOQ when that was bombed?
No, it wasn't my BOQ.
Okay.
I lived in another quarters.
What was duty like in Saigon during this period of time? Other than what I just read, what do you remember about it? And also, how were you exposed to Agent Orange? You were not out in the fields.
I got Agent Orange from when I had a day off. I would jump on any airplane going any direction because I wanted to see Vietnam. And I did, and I jumped on an airplane, a supply plane. It was going north to a place called Pleiku. And I noticed as I was sitting in my seat at takeoff, there were 3 blue 50-gallon drums attached to the bulkhead of the aircraft. And I noticed that one of the blue plastic barrels had a crack in it, and it was leaking. And I watched this leak come down onto the deck and just kind of cover the deck. And I didn't know what that clear fluid was, and it was Agent Orange. I went forward and told the pilot that one of the drums was leaking. He said, "Oh, that's okay." He said, "We'll be landing in Pleiku in a couple of minutes, and they'll get it off." And that's what they did, exactly. But all of us in the cabin, our shoes were soaked, and it was Agent Orange, and we didn't know it. I didn't know that until a long time.
Years later. And what are the symptoms? What are the effects today that you have?
Well, I had, let me tell you one other source of exposure that I had. When we would have battles and we would have a number of casualties brought in at once, I had the triage area most of the time, so I had to cut these uniforms off these kids And many times those uniforms,
Soaked.
having been out in the brush and the field, and
Soaked in Agent Orange.
I got it right from their uniforms.
The side effects you have today,
Oh,
Vanna?
yes, yeah.
Your legs are numb, you said.
I have no sensation from the feet to the knees, although this is called neurological pain, and neurological pain is often worse at night. So I have pretty severe night pain. I have difficulty in walking. I have to use a walker if I have to walk any distance, or I can hang on to walls and things. But I get along because I have to.
Gets along because she has to. And duty in Vietnam, was that eye-opening for you? Was it, it's a different from Western Pennsylvania? It's different. That's where you grew up, yes?
Oh, absolutely. That was the nice thing about being in the Navy. I can't tell you all the places I've been throughout the South Pacific, Southeast Asia, Far East, North Africa, just wonderful places. And I was always one. As soon as I touched down on the ground, I was off doing something. And I loved the island hop across the Pacific because I was a scuba diver. And I took my
Of course you were a scuba diver.
And the guys who took care of the air sea rescue units on every island, Wake Island, Johnson Island, Midway Island, Iwo Jima, Chi Jima, all those islands, they all were scuba divers because they didn't have a whole lot to do. And so I always carried my regulator. They had the tanks, and I would, I can remember Wake Island, scuba diving in Wake Island, the most clear water you ever saw. Beautiful, beautiful. So I scuba dived across the Pacific, I like to say.
Yeah, I can't believe you weren't brought in as the first woman in the Navy SEALs, to be perfectly honest.
Too tough. No woman can do it.
Oh, no, you could have done it. You, of anyone that I've ever met, could have done that. You were not there for the end of the war in Vietnam, the fall of Saigon, were you?
Oh, no, I was here back home.
And what was that like watching that happen and Operation Baby Lift from afar?
Oh, wrenching. It was sort of almost indescribable. And then that plane crashed,
Right.
So, no, it was... And one thing that I did, I remember very clearly, I was on afternoon shift at Portsmouth Naval Hospital, where I came back from Vietnam. And I was listening to the radio, just doing housework, and they said, we interrupt this program to announce that the American Embassy in Saigon has just been blown up. Well, I was glued to that radio, I'll tell you. And that embassy was just down the street from where we lived in our BOQ. And over 100 were injured, and I forget how many were killed now, but a lot, and they blew up our embassy.
Did you ever marry?
No, very close, but I lost my fiancé. He was landing on a carrier, and he missed the trap, and the tail hook didn't catch, and he went off the end of the carrier. It was called a boulder, and into 5,000 feet of water.
I'm so sorry. You joined the retired ranks in Annapolis in 1968. You've been involved with the Navy ever since in one way or another. You're wearing a Women in Aviation International sweatshirt right now.
Well,
but you stay active with all these military groups. I know, when we met, I met you at a welcome back ceremony for Vietnam veterans with the Hospice.
and the governor.
With the governor, exactly right. You're not lacking for anything to do. You're not bored.
I am not bored.
And you still get up there in airplanes, as I mentioned.
If I can, but I think last year was probably my last year.
I'm not going to let that happen. We'll get you back up in an airplane. Commander Hobus, thank you very much for joining me today. This has been a true pleasure.
It has been a pleasure for me too, Donna. It's fun to do these things, although I always am uneasy doing them.
Oh, you sounded like a pro, honestly. I think we're going to get you in here to start recording your own show.
Oh, no.
This is Donna Cole. This is the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.